Krista McAllister, and welcome to Cerius Leadership. Whether you're growing your business or another area of your life into what you want it to be, I welcome you. And today I am joined by selling strategy expert, Darrin Guttman. Darrin, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to get into kind of your area of expertise because I know you've got decades of honing it to where you have it today. And I'm so excited to have you share it with myself and our audience. When you look at the challenge of growing a business, it goes through so many different growth curves. I'm sure you have seen them all. And one of those first growth curves most businesses go through, it's getting from that inception to 1 million in revenue. I think the latest stat I've seen is that only about 5% of businesses make it beyond that $1 million achievement. From your experiences, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges to breaking past that first 1 million in revenue?
Well, I'm coming at it from a sales and marketing standpoint. There's a lot of different ways you can look at that question, but from a sales and marketing standpoint, what I tend to find is many business owners came from a corporate job where they're an expert in their field, but their field is not sales and marketing. So when they start their business, they tend to start with their warm market, and they tend to have a fairly robust one. And so they do well out of the gates, and then they get 6, 8 months in, maybe a year, maybe a little bit more, and they realize they've tapped out of their warm market, and now going after cold business is a big surprise because it's a huge difference. And so that's the setup. To answer your question, it would be that marketing and sales plan. Do I have a plan to do something outside of my expertise that I've never really done before, but now that I'm a business owner and I have to do everything, can I pull it off, especially when going after cold business? I find that to be one of the biggest challenges that we find with all the people in our community.
Yeah, I can see that from the perspective of having hired a number of salespeople, even looking at just going off of Rolodexes. Those Rolodexes have a very short life on them. And so regardless of the size of business, we can't necessarily hire for that Rolodex. We've got to hire for marketing and a sales process. And it's interesting if that's the biggest barrier to getting over that 1 million. So I think it's one of the biggest barriers in business, period, that you're hitting on.
Quite possibly.
What are some of the things that you work with business owners? And I know that you work with a lot of businesses in that 0 to 1 million mark.
Yeah, that's what we focus on.
Why did you decide that that really is where you can make the biggest impact, is helping companies get over that 1 million mark?
Why did I choose it? Well, so in 2002, I launched our parent company called Propel Sales Solutions, and that company focuses on businesses between 5 and 50 million, but 5 and 20 is really 5 million and 20 million is our sweet spot. But looking at who I am as a person, I really love startup. I love that mode. I love that time. I love that energy. I love the frustration. And so I always wanted to get into that area, but being able to afford to serve those people was near impossible. And so when I finally came up with a way to do that, I found a blue ocean, because nobody else is speaking to startups that are non-funded, because without the money, what's a consultant supposed to do? I don't blame anybody. There just isn't a service to go after those people. So once I figured that out, then I found myself in the midst of my passion project. I love doing this startup. And so what we did is we just found a way. Everything we do now for that sector is in group. So by doing it in group, everybody pays less and we still make our money. So that's how I was able to get into that area. But since it's untapped, it's really been a lot of fun to help people understand how to build the foundation of their sales and marketing plan.
Well, I can imagine being in a group meeting. The great thing about that sometimes is you learn through others' experiences, not just your own struggles.
Absolutely.
So as you're helping them figure out that sales strategy, the go-to-market, how do we sell we have this amazing service, we have this amazing product. How do we now get it to market? And you mentioned in a cold market.
Yep. So how do they do that? So here's the challenge. You start a business, and the first thing you'd have to do is start generating leads. We understand that. And so what they will do is they know what they offer, they know what their expertise is, and so they'll create a email campaign, maybe a LinkedIn campaign, maybe buy some Google ads, and they fail, and they fail. And then they start to get frustrated, and then they start to get desperate. And the reason for that is lead generation is not step one of the process. It's step two. And by skipping step one, you're now cutting corners. And anytime you cut corners, you know what's going to happen there. Step one is figuring out your strategic messaging. How are you different than your competition? It is the toughest thing for a small business owner to figure out, is how to communicate their differentiation in the marketplace. So that's where we start. We start at understanding who they are, who their target audience is, and how to best speak to that target audience. So then when you get your LinkedIn campaign going or your email campaign going, you're delivering the right message to the right audience. That's the beginning of all of it.
Even when you look at solopreneurs candidates, we work with a lot of individuals who are selling their services independently in the market. And that has got to be the most challenging thing to do. Because if you narrow where is my value or where am I different, you're almost narrowing your audience and you feel as though you're giving up everyone else that you could be selling.
Oh, you're
How
hitting
do you
something here.
How do you manage through that? Because if I'm not quite $1 million, I need to sell to everyone. And you're telling me I've got to narrow it down to a very specific messaging to a specific audience.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's getting fun. We have a niching strategy, and it's really important to understand something. The books we read are not about us. When you're reading Good to Great, you're reading books on businesses that you will probably never, ever be, let alone the great. You're not going to be the good either most of the time. Some people get there. I'm not saying they don't, but for the most part, that's not where we're going. And so when we're reading books on people we aren't, and we're trying to now take that information and apply it to our small business, we're missing. The dots don't connect. So the niching strategy that we promote is, first off, figure out who your audience is, because what you need to do is you need to become known as an expert in a field. And it's impossible to be an expert to everyone. I don't care what your business is. Once you figure out who it is that is your primary target audience, or as it's called, your avatar, you're speaking to that person, you're speaking to that company, you're speaking to that potential client. If something else comes your way that you can do, that you're not reinventing the wheel to do, because that's very expensive. It's a great way to put yourself out of business, but you can do it. But it is outside of your niche. Our strategy is take it. You're in a cash grab. Grab the cash. As long as you can be profitable. Don't take on things where you're working for a dime an hour, but take on things that you can do profitably. If it is your outside of your niche, you go ahead and do that, but continue to promote only that one specific segment. And over time, slowly start to pull away from any of that business that is outside of your core expertise or outside of your core audience as your core audience starts to build. And that is a decision a business owner has to make along the way, but you have to be disciplined. That's the hard, and that's what you're tapping into here, is you have to be disciplined.
What's that adage? If you're trying to talk to everyone, you're talking to no one.
Well, that's exactly how it goes.
And any amount of money and there's always that misconception of, well, if I'm marketing to these individuals, what about those individuals? Those individuals will find you. We're just trying to get as many at-bats as possible with those that we can serve the best and get as many chances to say yes to the business, to the point that we almost need to say no to the business because we have more than we know what to handle. And we've got another, then we've
Yeah.
got a more service delivery and operational challenge. So as we're working through and trying to figure out who is my persona, who is my niche, especially when I probably just started in business and I don't have any history behind me.
Yeah.
What are some techniques that you go through to get me thinking, who is that persona that I'm
Yeah.
serving? Who's most likely to need me?
To need me. Yeah. Okay. I find that business owners tend to know that. Whether they're disciplined enough to stick with it is the problem. And so what I do is I start with this fact. Every brand is a direct reflection of its founder. If you think about Apple, Steve Jobs has been gone for how long? And that business still operates on the principles in which he started in his garage. Not Wozniak, but Jobs. If you look at Nordstrom is another one I point out. John W. Nordstrom started that business in 1901. Today, that business still operates on the one main thing that he was all about, and it wasn't fashion. It was service. What do they call a salesperson at Nordstrom? They call them a personal shopper. What do they call them at Macy's? An employee. That just goes to the brand of Nordstrom. Okay, so that's where it starts. So what we do is we look at three things. What is the founder's core expertise? What is their passion? And what is their why? The why has been added in the last few years due to Simon Sinek, of course, but it really, really helps. Those three things are like a fingerprint. No two businesses are the same when their founder really identifies with those three things: core expertise, their passion, and their why. They might do the same thing as the guy down the street or the gal up the street. Doesn't matter. Those three things. So what we do is we build their differentiation around those. And then from there, you have to manufacture it. The next step is then what you're talking about. Who's the audience that needs this primarily? What's the primary? And so here's how we determine what your primary target audience is. It is the people that you click with the best. It is the people that you offer the greatest value to. It is the people that you enjoy, they appreciate you, and that you are most profitable. That's what I consider the perfect win-win. If you can describe that one person, and now let's go out and get 20, 30, 40 of those people, now you are taking your differentiation and offering it to an audience that you know needs it, wants it, will accept it, buy it, and so forth. That's our strategy.
And I can see that by taking that, and as my company grows, there's a system in place now. I've got a clear definition. I'm able to communicate it. I love the consistency. We're sticking with it. Yes, we're taking business from over here, but any dollar that we spend on marketing, here is where we are spending it. We're not chasing the shiny object syndrome and the latest and the greatest offering that just came out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we're very focused in that. As a business owner, selling my product, that is so challenging to stick to that consistent messaging. I continually want to change it in almost every conversation as I'm testing it out and as I'm growing. How do you keep me focused on that initial messaging? Or is there a system for testing it out
Mm-hmm.
and getting feedback and then adjusting it? Because that's
Yeah.
in my mind, I want to test until
Yeah.
I forget what the original hypothesis was.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. Okay. So what we do is we create a differentiation statement. That is the first piece of our puzzle, is to write your differentiation statement. But to your point, it will evolve over time. But by doing that, you are clearly explaining more or less to yourself what makes you different. Then your job, once your differentiation statement is in place, your job is that everything you do and everything you say and everybody in your organization, what they do and they say has to pay off that differentiation statement in everything you do. Go ahead. I see the
It's
wheels
almost
turning.
as though you gave me the answers to all the rest of the questions as I'm growing my business. Because now every single decision we make, any messaging, any post LinkedIn, any ad I make, I'm asking myself, does this connect, resonate, or pay off with that differentiation statement?
Yeah.
It's binary, yes or no. If the answer is no, then I go back to the drawing board. I can see the consistency now throughout the organization.
Yeah. And that's the key word right there, consistency. Because here's the thing, going back to the difference between the big brands and the startups. Big brands have millions of things that are different than a startup, and they're all dollars. They have millions of dollars to pay the right marketing people to develop their messaging, and they have millions of dollars to drive that message into our head. Startups and small businesses do not have that money. So in that situation, branding and differentiating is very different. There, it's more, you can't expect your prospects or clients, even if they've been clients for years, to be able to recite your differentiation statement. That's not what it's about. It's about that feeling they get when they do business with you and your people, that feeling that they get that there is a click, there is a connection, there is value. That's what we're promoting. And it only happens in everything you say and everything you do.
And I've heard that more and more. Marketers, salespeople, a lot of business owners talk about I don't ask my clients anymore what problems I'm solving for them. I ask them how they felt before, and I ask them how they felt after.
Oh, interesting. Like that.
What I'm doing is I'm trying to change the way they feel, not necessarily the way that they buy. Because most are, it's a thought process of emotion when they're connected to the brand,
Mm-hmm.
not just the transaction of solving an immediate problem.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fascinating. So as I'm thinking through and I've got the consistency, at some point, it's easy for me to sell because I started it, I own it. Who's going to sell better than the founder? At some point, the founder's not going to be selling. How do you take what's been tried, tested, and found to be the way to do it from the founder and translate that to the next person?
Yeah.
As I start to scale, because I may or may not be able to sell enough because I'm selling it and I'm delivering it. I may need to get that second person or find out another way of generating that to get to that 1 million mark.
Yeah. Okay. So remember the name of our company, the Scale Summit. So everything we do and everything we preach is on building to scale right out of the gates. So this comes down to our playbook. What we do is we create a playbook, and more for the sales part than the marketing, because as the business grows, there's a pretty good chance that the founder, the owner, will start to delegate sales, but not necessarily marketing. And sometimes that too. It just depends on their skill set. But when it's the sales part, we create a step-by-step sales process. Everything is systemized. Everything is documented. It doesn't mean you're reading scripts, although sometimes you might be.
Mm-hmm.
It means that there is a step-by-step system that your sales process goes through and helps the buyer through their journey. But the founder, the owner themselves are the ones working it, and they are perfecting it. Question?
No,
Okay.
it's clicking. It's clicking now because
Okay.
as the original person who's usually doing something, the last thing I'm thinking of is documenting it or trying to figure out how someone else can do it because I just do it. It's like
Yeah.
breathing.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem right there. If you have sales ability, right, you just do it. You just find ways to figure it out. That's what entrepreneurs do. You tell me I can't do it, bah, I'm going at it, No, that I understand, but that isn't scalable, as we know. That isn't sellable, as we know. And so it's really important that the entrepreneur runs their own system as it's documented. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, you're going to get the greatest results. But number two, when it's time to hand it over, you got training in a box ready to go. You can hand it over.
Mm-hmm.
And now the salesperson that comes in might be a better salesperson than you, might not, but might, but they can't pull the wool over your eyes. They can't tell you it doesn't work because you've just done it for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or years, whatever it may be. And so now what we do, and this was one of the original thoughts in building our business and our community, is helping business owners control their growth. Because if you, let's say, are an IT expert and sales is not your thing, and now you have to go out and hire a salesperson who's a better salesperson than you, that could be a really dangerous and very slippery slope, especially if they do well and then they feel like they own you because they do.
Mhm.
And now they dictate what's going on. And that's the last thing a business owner wants.
I heard a saying recently. It said you want to hire a salesperson that's only about 75% as good as you.
Yep.
Because if they're better than that, then just go out and start their own business, or they can make the demands, and they're worth it at that point because they can do as well as the owner can. It's absolutely the case.
Yeah. But the 75% point is our big point. I have a feeling I know where you heard that. I have a feeling I do, but yeah.
Probably in discussions with you.
Oh, maybe that was it. Sorry.
So you made a good point though. Some business owners, when we started, you mentioned this at the beginning, are subject matter experts. We're great. I might be an IT expert, and I am great at helping businesses figure out how to mitigate the risk, how to solve their IT issues. However, getting new clients doesn't come naturally for me.
Right.
So I'm not taking how I do my sales process and putting it into a documented way. How do you help me go through? What are your recommendations for me figuring out? I got to be able to sell it first rather than trying to depend on finding person after person after person and trial and error, having them figure it out. How do you help me figure that out first when that does not come naturally to some?
Yeah. You have to follow the steps. The steps in selling are very clear. Now, selling is an interesting thing, though, because you could have all the strategy in the world, but if you don't have the ability to sell, meaning the communication skills, the likability factor, the tenacity to hang in there and take a no and a no and a no and a no, if you don't have all of those things, unfortunately, strategy is the icing on the cake. But in my estimation, the icing is the best part of the cake. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, obviously, but without the cake, you don't have anything to ice. So that's that's piece number one. And a lot of entrepreneurs get themselves quite a ways with no specific strategy, but just making it happen because they're likable, because they have the ability to communicate, they know their product very well and all of that. But when it comes to handing the reins over to somebody else, it's a step-by-step process. So we have what we call the 7 best practices, and each practice is its own specific strategy where we can talk minutes to hours on each individual one, understanding what you're trying to accomplish at each of those 7 best practices and where they fit and why. That's really big as well. That's how we build out a selling system. Now, there's actually 9 steps to the sales process, but the 7 best practices are the things that we really hone in on to make sure that a non-salesperson understands the communication pattern and the communication path. That's really important. They have to understand what they say and we say as humans intuitively sometimes, and how that is rejected by prospects, even though the prospect may not fully understand why. It just becomes a bad feeling to them, but there's a very specific reason it happens.
That's amazing. So as you take individuals through the 9-step process and the 7 best practices, any examples or stories that you remember going, we started here, we ended up there, or any of those aha moments that comes out of it?
Well, I will tell you there are a couple of things, 2 of the 7 best practices that are missed a lot. If you're asking me for an example of it, that might be a little tougher to dig up while I'm on the spot, but I probably could come up with something. But the 2 things that are missed a lot are, and I'm talking about novice salespeople or people who just don't find sales to be their expertise or not even much interest, maybe. One of them is how well they pre-qualify. And when you don't pre-qualify properly, you sometimes find out at the very end, you never even had a match worth pursuing, which is not fair to you, of course, but less fair to your prospect, because you're the professional. You should be able to cut it off. So pre-qualifying is really, really important. The second thing, oh, did you have a question on that?
Yeah, I want to dig in before you move on. I want to get
Sure.
into
Yeah.
pre-qualifying, because having gone through this experience and spent years of low closure rates to find out, well, because you're trying to close people that you shouldn't have been having a conversation with to begin with.
Right.
Explain a little bit more on a pre-qualification.
Sure.
What does that look like, and why is it so important?
Okay. So what it looks like is a couple, 3 questions that will help you identify, am I talking to my primary audience, my secondary audience, my tertiary audience, or somebody who shouldn't be an audience at all? And the reason you're trying to figure that out is because more times than not, you're not going to make a sale on the first call.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be follow-up, and sometimes an awful lot of follow-up, especially when you get to a bigger ticket item. And what you're trying to figure out is, where do I spend my time? And so if you identify a primary target audience, I have a friend that's a very good salesperson. He says, once I find out that I am talking to my primary audience, I become a heat-seeking missile. I don't give up. I'm on that person. Not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that's where I'm going to spend my time. If I find out they're secondary, I'll still spend time on them, but less. But if they're not an audience at all, it's sometimes better just to say goodbye right from the beginning. So how do we do it is the next question. Or did you have something in between there?
Yeah, I'm curious about that, because where I've seen some really successful business owners grow is they're doing it through collaboration, they're doing it through referral networks. And I can see in those first 3, if they are not your audience, someone you know you've networked with, or go find individuals and referral partners who are, you're sending business their way. And those 3 questions, they've got individuals who aren't their audience but are your audience, and they're sending it your way.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how that can be leveraged for so many marketing and business development opportunities. My BD
Yep.
head brain just starts going as you're talking, Darrin. I want to go
Yeah.
build someone's business here.
Yeah.
Is that I can see by getting that clarification up front, you're giving them the opportunity to expand their businesses in ways they may not have even thought of.
Yeah. You're spending the right time with the right people, which is one of the recipes for success.
Fantastic. Now, mentioned there's a second one. I
Yeah.
got so excited about the first one here and energized. I can only imagine what the second one is.
Well, the second one is collaborative selling or consultative selling. We call it collaborative selling because we teach how to collaborate, which is the most very important part. So a lot of people have heard of collaborative selling, and a lot of people have heard of consultative selling. And I find very few people do it, and those that do it, some don't do it very effectively. But there's a stage in the early stage of the sales process where your prospect is casting a very large net just to figure out what's available. More times than not, your prospect is not going to be an expert in your field like you are. Well, almost every time that's the case. But in some situations, they may not have purchased this for months or years, or maybe ever in their life. This might be the only time. And so there's a stage of the sales process at the beginning where they're casting out a big net, just trying to figure out what's available. And the last thing they want to hear is how great you are as a salesperson. That's where we start to lose them without knowing it, because we feel intuitively, when you're not a professional salesperson, we feel like, well, you brought us to the table, you want to talk about what we do, so I'm going to start the conversation by explaining what we do, how we're different, and that's not the right time. That actually repels the prospect because it comes across as self-serving without anybody knowing it. That's just the feeling they get in their gut. But what collaborative selling says is, once I uncover their pain, the most important part of the sales process, once I uncover their pain, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to help them understand the options available to them. That's collaborative. And once we decide together what's where your interest lies and where your threshold for everything from what it takes to do business with you to what it costs, at that point, you can start to narrow it down together because that's what they want to do anyway. That's what due diligence is,
Mhm.
narrowing down all the options to my best two or three and then deciding from there. Well, the salesperson can help in that and should help in that. And that's missed a lot.
I can see they almost become an advisor to that, because if the customer is in research stage, they're trying to figure out what are the 10 different things that I should be asking to then figure out how the options are different and which option is best for me. So
Boom.
you become an advisor up front and educating them on that. I
Yeah.
can imagine the trust that you're and credibility that you're building with them.
Well, you used the two words that we use. We explain the collaborative selling portion of the sales process as you are becoming their trusted advisor. You said both of those words. So you nailed it. And in order to do that, you just have to remember, don't sell your stuff. Don't present your stuff. They don't want to hear that yet. But here's the interesting part. The moment you're done collaborating, that's exactly what they want to hear. Now that you've helped them get there and you helped them do their due diligence, maybe now they're saying, well, what about you? What makes you so good? What makes you different? Why would I want to do business with you? Now, they may not be saying it in an adversarial way like I just made it sound, but they want to know now that you need to give them a presentation. And that's when storytelling starts.
Uh, you talk about those two being the most commonly overlooked. What's the one that you find is the most challenging to adopt to, whether it's that solopreneur or as you're bringing on that next salesperson? What's the one where you see just the really internal struggle?
Yeah. In the sales process, the hardest thing to do is uncover pain and understand how to do that properly. Because most people do fact finding. And the reason for that is fact finding will give you all the information you need to create a quote. It will not give you the information you need to be a successful salesperson. And so we stop short of uncovering the true pain. And the true pain is the emotional pain.
Hmm.
One of the big pillars in my sales career of understanding, and my personal aha moment many years ago, is when I heard the term people buy on emotion and justify with logic. Have you ever heard that sentence?
I have not.
Oh, okay. So that was a
That's
big
new to
thing for
me.
me. People buy an emotion and justify with logic. The reason that was big for me is I'm a real big logic guy. Like I like to explain things and show them how they click together. And when I learned, oh, the sale is actually made on the emotional side, and then later they need to back up their decision with logic, that was a big aha moment for me. And so from there, I learned how to truly uncover pain where I ask my questions just like a novice would. But then the last question is, oh, so how does that affect your life? Or how does that affect your business? That one question will give you the answer that will lead you to your sale.
As you're talking through that, I can see a lot of that is marketing 101. And through these steps, you're really putting together a complete end to end marketing and sales system, because the two should never be separate. Marketing and sales system
Yeah.
that can be scalable, that can be taught, that can be refined. And it's interesting as we get a lot of calls saying, I need a fractional VP of sales because we've run through our Rolodexes, we're not closing, we're not getting our leads in. And we ask the question of, well, tell me about your marketing efforts. Like, what marketing efforts? I've got a sales team. Why do I need marketing? I've got a sales team. I can imagine your where you're going to go down the path first, which is we said, let's talk about marketing first. Where do you see that role inside of organizations of once you have the sales process in place, all the answers it gives to now here's how we're going to go to market. Here's our messaging.
What do we see in small businesses?
Yes.
Yeah, it's non-existent. It doesn't happen. And so, it's funny. I am not a marketer. I am very passionate about marketing. I understand its role, but I'm a sales strategist. And so everything I'm looking at is sales communication. Well, the reason I'm sometimes considered a marketer is because when I learned that your strategic messaging is the key to sales, that's where sales begins. It's not just your personality. There's got to be a strategy behind it. When I learned that, that was my next big aha moment I had in my career. And that's when I learned positioning, was after the people buy on logic or buy on emotion and justify with logic. And so I am passionate about the fact that and here's the way I like to say it. I may have said this to you before. A salesperson is like the actor in a movie, and the marketer is the writer. The last thing we want when we go to see a movie or watch a TV show is the actor delivering their own lines, unless they happen to be both, which is rare, because it's two different skill sets. The actor's job is to look at those lines and bring them to life. That's obviously a tremendous skill set to have. But it's best to have a writer write the words and the actor perform them. Same thing in sales. You want the marketer to write the strategy or write the words. Literally, the differentiation statement is a sentence of words. And now the salesperson's job is to act it out, go bring it home. And so I'm so passionate about marketing that my oldest son went and got a degree in it. So he's a formally educated marketer, because my passion for that, I didn't go that route because I didn't know at that age, but it trickled downhill. And that's how important marketing is to me as a salesperson.
I can see that now. Without the marketing piece of it, you've got your sales team. It's like Wednesday night at the Improv. Everyone's just making it up and probably doing it a little differently than each other, differently each time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It becomes somewhat, when you're in the audience watching it, it becomes somewhat entertaining, versus if you go to a live play where a script has happened, everyone is staged, and they practiced. It's a very different experience, and they're able to do the same thing night after night after night, and the audience has that same experience.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
I love it. You have not shared that one with me. Thank you.
I haven't. Okay, I wasn't sure.
I am now going to steal that. So, from your perspective and working with a lot of startup businesses and solopreneurs, I'd love to get your overarching advice on the amount of time and effort that should be put into that go-to-market. You and I have had this conversation on, we've seen a lot of business plans, and 95% of it is on the product, and 5% of that is on the go-to-market. How are we going to get sales, and how are we going to grow the business? So as I'm sitting back thinking about, I want to start a business, I'm struggling a bit to grow it, how much effort, energy, and purposefulness, let's say intentionality, should be put into that go-to-market plan, and what's my first step in that? Let's circle back.
You're tapping on a very, very big challenge for small business owners. And here's why. When I work on the $5 to $50 million side, which is a retainer, one-on-one retainer service, if you're the CEO of a $10 million business, you can take a day off or 2 or 3 days off in a retreat and just strategize your business. The working on versus working in scenario. You can work on your business because you have people in place and systems in place and things of that nature. When you're sub $1 million, that time doesn't exist. It's just not there. That's your family time you have to take away from. That's your personal time you have to take away from, just to sit and think. And there was a time, there's only 2 places to think now. It's the shower, or there's one place now. It's the shower. It used to be the shower and the bathroom, but now we bring our phones to the bathroom, so that's out. So now it's just the shower, and that's just not enough time. And so the point is that what the Scale Summit is all about is forcing a business owner to take time to work on their business from a strategic growth standpoint and build that strategy out. So the answer to your question, very long answer to a very short question, is discipline. To make that discipline. So what we do is we have a 2.5-hour meeting once a month with a group of 5 business owners. And then what I suggest is 1 hour every week, work on your playbook, which is your strategy time, or like we like to call it, your scaling time. It's very hard to manufacture that time when you have bills to pay and trash to take out and customers to answer to and partners and everything else. That's the biggest challenge I find in small businesses, taking the time. And then do you have the direction? Because it's expensive and it's hard to find. And so that's another thing. Okay, now that I take the time, what do I do?
Yep. How do I implement it? It's funny. It reminds me of the old developer analogy of, for every dollar you don't spend in the strategy and creation phase of what software do I want to develop, why, for whom am I developing it,
Mm-hmm.
any change you make in the development stage is going to cost you 10 more dollars. Every change you make once you go to market is going to cost you $100.
Isn't that, yeah,
You want
good.
to
I
spend
love that.
100, 10, or $1. And so much of what you've shared is that you're working with them on how do we spend 10 $1
Mm-hmm.
versus $110 or
Yeah.
1,000. It exponentially gets harder. So
Interesting.
as I'm starting out, what would be your key pieces of advice to say, get this part of it right, or don't miss this?
Yeah. Figure out how to communicate your differentiation. That is step one. And the way you do that, as I mentioned, is look at what your core expertise, your passion, your why is, and then figure out how that attaches to your primary target audience. And then manufacture, make up how you're going to deliver it. I make that sound very easy. It is not easy. You'll need people to bounce ideas off of. So that's step number one. But people have a really hard time with that. It's just not an intuitive thing to do.
What's your recommendation for creating that discipline? Because I love the word consistency and using that with any founder, because I think the shiny object syndrome is that opportunity is the greatest killer of success, because we go after opportunity and that
Yeah.
consistency. What is a good practice or mindfulness?
Yeah. I'm almost reluctant to answer that question for the one reason is this is me. I can tell you what I suggest, but I don't do everything perfect. So, and I don't do everything like everyone else. So everyone does it differently. But what I suggest is you calendar in your time to work on your business. If you're a morning person, maybe it's first thing in the morning. If you're an evening person, maybe it's 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. If you're neither of those, maybe a weekend with a cup of coffee is the way to go. But I suggest calendaring it in. And if you do that and you stick to it, you will see your business grow exponentially. No question in my mind. If you take the time, it's the whole sharpen the saw thing, the Covey thing, sharpen the saw. It's that same concept. I didn't make this thing up. It's already out there. But the way I do it, so for me, since we've launched the Scale Summit, I'm back to very long days. But I like to go to the gym. And I want to go to the gym on a regular basis. And this is what I enjoy. And it also just kind of frees me. I literally calendar it in. Every Monday, the first thing that comes up on my to-doist is calendar the gym for the week. I could show you right now that my calendar for this week has 5 days of when I'm going to go to the gym. That's something that's important to me. If I can do it for that, I believe anybody can do it for the growth of their business. There's a problem. I love the gym. I love sales. I'm going to do that. Do you think I'm going to do it about things I don't love, like finance, which isn't my core strength? That's where it gets interesting.
Finance is not most business owners' core strength, which is why our phone rings so much when
Oh
that
yeah,
comes
I'm sure.
up.
I hear you. Yep.
I don't think that there could be a better piece of advice, and especially as you're figuring out how do we grow it, how do we get more than 5% of businesses to get past that 1 million in revenue. And I think that you've given us a lot of insights and advice on how to achieve that, or how to help people we know and love who are in that situation, point them towards the right resources. Darrin, I always learn from our conversations.
I always enjoy them
Thank you
too.
so much. I love
Thanks
it.
for having
Thank
me.
you for joining us today on Serious Leadership.
Thanks. Appreciate it.